You know what I mean? Like Ephesians 6, put the armor of God on. But today, we're going to look at a book that we rarely look at. And if you're not super familiar in the Bible, you may have never heard of it. So if you could be turning with me to the book of Esther. And the reason why I want to look at the book of Esther, the book of Esther is unique amongst all scripture for reasons that I will get to in a second. But when we talk about faith, I think when we hear the word faith, we mean a lot of things. And I think in our culture, one of the first things that comes to mind is what we believe in. But biblically speaking, that is a very limited definition of faith. The way that the Bible presents faith to us is sort of two parts of a whole. Because on the one hand, there are the things that God does, and on the other hand are the decisions that people make. And next week, we're going to be looking at what God does in the book of Esther. But today, I want to focus on the characters in the book of Esther. All right? As I was saying, the book of Esther is a very unique book. It belongs to, in the Hebrew Bible, what are called the writings. So it belongs to a grouping of books that are with Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, the book of Job. A lot of these books are very wisdom-oriented. And Esther is no different. It's not a book of wisdom. It's not the book of Proverbs. But we are supposed to be reading it through eyes of wisdom. And I'll get to what that means a little bit later. All right? It is also very unique because the characters that are in the story, okay, are characters who have chosen exile. What happens in the book of Esther is happening after Nehemiah and Ezra have already gone back to Jerusalem. So the Jews that we look at in this story are people who have chosen to live in Persia as Jews. Now, more than likely, it's not that they're bad Jews, but the Jewish characters in the story seem to be second-generation Jews. Some of them may have never even seen the land of Israel. But because this story is very Persian, the name of Israel is never mentioned. Like the people that you see in the story are not longing to go back to Israel. They are where they are. All right? Another name that is not mentioned in the story, which is very, very curious, is the name of God. God is never mentioned in this book. Not a one time. Nobody utters the name of God. Nobody utters anything remotely resembling God. However, God is not absent. All right? And we're going to see some of that today, but we're going to see most of that next week. All right? Now, here's the other thing. Because it's very important. There's four main, well, there's kind of two, there's one main character, but there's, the main character is Esther, but she's surrounded by a cast of characters, and I have to introduce them to you. All right? And they each play the role in this story. So, the first person that we're going to hear about when we start reading here is King Ahasuerus. He is the king of Persia. All right? And the way that he is portrayed in this story is that he's just a fun-loving, party-loving drunk who's very easy to manipulate. All right? We also have Mordecai. Hold on, I'm skipping one. Oh, sorry. We also we are told about Haman is that he is an Agagite. The reason why that's interesting, all right, a lot of you are looking at me like, Rodrigo, why are you sharing this with us? Let me say this, all right? A lot of you think that like the nerdy stuff in the Bible doesn't change anything and it doesn't deepen the meaning of things, but I'm about to prove you wrong. Because see, here's the thing. Haman, as I mentioned before, is an Agagite. Agagites are descendants of Canaanites. Haman is the villain of the story. And so, by the author of Esther telling us that he is an Agagite, he's basically telling us, hey, this is a familiar foe. Right? Like, this detail is not, it goes over our heads, but for a Jewish reader, they go like, oh, this dude comes from the Canaanites, our very long-lasting enemy. All right? We also have Mordecai, who, as I mentioned, the story doesn't make it clear. Either he was a very young child and is very old now, and he basically witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem and has lived in exile his whole life, but his parents are Jews, all right? But from what it seems like, he is very familiar with the Persian environment because he works in Persian government, all right? And Mordecai is uncle to our main character, Esther, who was born in Persia. All right? And Esther's parents die, and Mordecai adopts her. All right? The only thing that we know about Esther, of the get-go, is that she's beautiful. All right? Now, to begin with, let me paint you the picture of the world that our characters live in. All right? If you would turn with me to Esther 1. We're going to read the whole chapter. It's not super long. All right? It says, this happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media and the noble governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days. 180 days in all. So this guy throws a party that's 180 days long. All right? When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings set with cords of fine linen and purple to silver things and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver and a mosaic of payment of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the kings. Drinking by flagons without restraint, for the king had given order to all officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, the king was merry with wine. He commanded Mehuman, Bista, Harbona, Bigda, and Abada, Sether, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended to him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the people and the officials her beauty. For she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command and convey that to the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws, for his was king's procedure towards all who were served in law and custom. And those next to him were Kasherna, Sether, Admat. I'm not going to read all those names. They were officials. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this chapter 1. So after these things, King Ahasuerus, there's one big detail that I missed. So between Esther becoming queen and where we are now, Mordecai, who works in the palace, gets wind that some people are trying to assassinate the king. And because Esther is now queen, she tells Esther, and then this assassination plot is foiled. All right? But just store that in the back of your heads, because this is going to be important later. All right? But now, this is where the tension. So up until now, nothing but good things have happened, at least as far as Esther and Mordecai, our Jewish protagonists, are concerned. But now we run into the problem. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the officials who were with him. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and did obeisance to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down to him. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" When they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's word would avail, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or obey him, Haman was infuriated. But he thought it beneath him to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So having been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. All right? So basically, we have Haman, who becomes the number 2 to the king, right? And people are supposed to bow to him. And Mordecai, we are not told why, chooses to not bow down to him. Now, there are multiple reasons why this may be so. All right? Maybe Mordecai thought this would be idolatry, and in true Jewish fashion, just like Daniel, he would not bow down to a man. But Mordecai was also a Persian official, so this may just be jealousy. Like, he is the one that saved the king in chapter 2, right? And maybe he thinks, like, hey, maybe I should be made number 2. So, we are not told why Mordecai doesn't bow down to Haman. But what we do know is the consequence of Mordecai's actions is that Haman now wants to kill all of the Jews. All right? And so he goes to King Ahasuerus and tells him, like, hey, we need to pass this law so that we can kill all the Jews in the kingdom. And King Ahasuerus basically agrees, and then they have a banquet to celebrate this decision. A lot of banquets happening here. All right? And so now we are in the main problem of the story. All the Jews are going to die. All right? Now, here's the thing. And I think this is a very important thing to drive home. What we are presented with in this book, in chapter 4, which we're going to read here in a second, is the big decision. Right? And again, one of the things that I want you to walk away with today is this idea, all right, that faith and having a firm faith is equal parts what God is doing, but also equal parts what you choose to do. You as an individual, all right? Because faith isn't just having the right doctrine, and faith isn't just believing the right things. Faith requires action. and gave him a message for Mordecai saying, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone, may that person live. I myself have not been called to come into the king for 30 days. All right? So certainly, Esther seems to be sensing, hey, I may have to play a role here, but my situation is very precarious. Because if I don't do this right, I may die. All right? And again, we've already been painted a picture in which a queen has already been killed. So in Esther's mind, she knows, hey, I know what can happen to me if I take the wrong step. All right? Again, Esther is very aware of the world that she lives in. All right? Let's keep reading here. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think that in the king's palace, you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. But you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to the royal dignity for just a time as this. Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. And neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and all my maids will also fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. All right? So again, this is what's so fascinating about this very short passage. All right? Mordecai basically is trying to get Esther to do something because she's in a very special position to be able to save her people. And Esther's going hey, this could be really dangerous for me. All right? And then Mordecai's answer is hey, don't think you'll be safe, but also don't think that you're the only answer. All right? But perhaps, maybe, you have been put in the position that you've been put for this particular time. And then she has a choice to make. Now, here's the thing, and I really, really need us to think about this. All right? I know that all of us are not beautiful women. All right? But, I think we all have to ask ourselves the same question. Why am I where I am at? Because maybe you're there for a specific reason, and God is just waiting for you to decide. You're just sitting there, and God is wanting you to make a choice. pronounced. And Esther's answer, her response of like, hey, go and fast for me, is also clearly conscious of a God in a God community. All right? So here's the thing. And I think I've been saying this pretty consistently, and I will say it again. All right? In our culture, we are made to believe that we are out here flailing all by ourselves. But we are part of a community. That if I went to like 6 people in this congregation and I was like, listen, this is happening in my life, I need you to fast for me. They would do it in a heartbeat. We're out here navigating the world thinking that we're just kind of like this lone pirate on a ship and like doing all of the things that is up to us, but we are part of a community. And I think a lot of times we don't act because we think that we're alone. But here, Esther is both very conscious of a God who's going to answer this fast, and of a God community who's going to fast for her. So even though all this pressure's on her shoulders, she clearly understands, like, hey, like, I'm not alone here. Right. But she's still deciding to do something. Amen. Now, obviously, I don't know everyone's situation here. Right? Some of you may be super happy with your lives. Some of you may be very unhappy with your lives. And I think no matter what the situation is in either case, a lot of times we go like why am I here? But I'm telling you, you are wherever you are for the chance to do something great for God. And a lot of times we don't choose because it's risky. But again, a firm faith involves taking risk. It involves us taking risky action. But here's the other thing that I really want us to walk away with from today, because one of the interesting things about Esther as a character, and again, as I mentioned before, this book in the Hebrew Bible is not so in our Bible, like our Bible, like if you have an English Bible, this book is not organized in the same way that the Jews would have organized it. But in the Jewish Bible, this book is what's called the writings. And the writings is a combination of wisdom books and historical books, and that's just kind of like a perfect combination of the two. But we're supposed to be reading the story, like as I mentioned before, through the eyes of wisdom. All right? So here's the thing. What's amazing about Esther is not only that she acted, but that she acted with great wisdom. Because see, here's the thing, and this is very interesting. Esther is basically about to oppose the king. All right? She's about to oppose the decision that the king made. Right? And she could easily stand in the court and be like, hey, king, what you're doing is wrong. All right? But she chooses to not do that. All right? Esther is portrayed as an extremely wise character. In Jewish literature, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of different definitions for wisdom, but one of them is being able to do the appropriate thing given a particular situation. The one that sort of guarantees the best outcome. Wisdom is being sly. It's kind of like knowing how to navigate a difficult situation with a lot of skill. And Esther does that. And understand this, all right? Because I really want you to walk away with this, right? At the beginning of the story, very early on in the book, we have two examples of people who kind of rebel to their situation. We have Queen Vashti, who, upon being called to basically be lust upon, she goes, I don't want to do that, and she dies. And then you have Mordecai who doesn't want to bow down to Haman, and then that gets all of the Jews in trouble. And so you have people who are resisting, whose outcome wasn't a good one. And so it's almost like the book is telling us, like, hey, Queen Vashti and Mordecai, not very wise. Because the outcome was not a good one. But what we see with Esther all throughout the book, all right, is that she navigates a very difficult world very skillfully. All right? So, for example, anytime somebody gives her advice in the story, she listens to it. In wisdom literature, there are things that are kind of always opposed. All right? There's kind of like with being rash or being calculated. And in the story, the characters that are rash, we are told, create different, like, bad outcomes. But Esther, who's calculated, creates good outcomes. Right. In wisdom literature, there's also a very strong opposition between excess and being more measured. And so, for example, we'll get here in a second, but one of the things that Esther does to get into the king's ear, if you will, is that she throws a banquet. Because she goes, clearly, this king loves banquets, right? But instead of doing like a long 180-day banquet, she does 2 banquets that are 3 days each. All right? So and there's only 2 guests at each banquet. So instead of being like this huge party for a bunch of people, right? She only invites the king and Haman, and it's only a 3-day. I think it's one feast, and then 3 days later another. So it's not 2 3-day feasts. It's 1 day separated by 3 days. All right. So Esther is being shown as this more measured character in a world full of excess. So what the author is basically telling us about Esther is that she's wise. And she's the only character in the story who is wise. Let me just give you this example, and then I'll give you the punchline here, because I think this is important. I'm not just telling you this just to tell you, right? It says in Esther 5, all right? So Esther has this problem that she knows that she can't just walk up to the king. She needs to figure out a way, all right, to get his attention. So on the 3rd day, Esther put on, this is after the fast, by the way. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne inside the palace, opposite the entrance to the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. The king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther desires." So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther said, "This is my petition and request. It has wise decisions. Esther in this book is portrayed again as a super wise character. She just knows what to do given the circumstance that she is presented in. Right? Again, this book, it seems to be meant for Jews who have decided to stay in Persia. All right? And it's almost like this is I hate to call it this, but it's almost like this is a guide to be successful as an immigrant in another place. And part of what we're being told is like, you better know how to navigate your foreign world. All throughout Scripture, there's this idea of wisdom where on the one hand we're supposed to be innocent as doves and as crafty as snakes. And Esther is the perfect example of that. Because it's not like she's out here conniving, and it's not that she's out here being evil, but she's sly. Like she knows how to navigate her world. She knows how to zigzag in her world that is extremely complicated. A dangerous world. And so I bring this up, all right, because again, faith is equal parts what God is doing and what we decide to do. But in that transaction, we also need to learn to be wise. There is something that you can do in whatever circumstance that you're in that will but that will increase the chances of a good outcome. All right? This has been such a valuable lesson for me, all right? Because my standard mode of operation is just kick everything in the face. All right? If there's a problem, there's nothing that a good kick in the chest doesn't fix and some horsepower. But the thing is that that's not the solution to every problem. All right? My solution to most problems is like be loud, say what you think, right? But I have learned, like, hey, that doesn't always get you the best outcome. Right? And so wisdom is being able to go and analyze the situation and be like, what can I do? Like, I've been positioned in a very, God has put me here to do something. Maybe that's helping somebody be converted. Maybe that's changing the culture at your workplace. Maybe that's helping a family member. But any of those situations are complicated. We do not live in a simple world. And a lot of times, we think that displaying a strong faith is just doing the rashest, most radical thing. And let me say this, there is a time for that. But the thing is that we have to know when that time is and when it is not. Sometimes situations will require for us to be heavy-handed and radical. But sometimes we may just have to throw a banquet. Like Esther clearly learned, right? This king loves himself a banquet. So if I'm going to do this really difficult thing, the best setting for me to talk to him is a banquet. Like she learned that. That's wisdom. That's her observing the world around her and going like, this, you know what, this can guarantee me a pretty good outcome. But one of the things I have never, ever, in my life as a Christian, I've been taught to be humble. I've been taught to listen, right? I've been taught to be faithful. I've been taught all these things, but there is so much in the Bible that calls us to be wise. And Esther is a perfect example of that. It's not just making decisions. It's not just making decisions that are faithful to God, but it's making wise decisions that are faithful to God. Now, we're going to stop. The story is not over. All right? between now and then. All right? Because next week I'm going to get super nerdy. All right? Like I'm going to have charts and diagrams and drawings, but it's all for you to understand this book better. All right? But again, what we're going to look at this next week is where is God in this story? Because clearly we see the people and we see what they're doing. But next week I want us to see what God is doing. And let me say this, just to guide your reading. If you read this book between now and next week. This book presents a lot of ethical conundrums. Because again, Esther's world is complicated, much like ours is. So as you read the book, I want you to be looking like, this is questionable. And I just want you to be comfortable with it. Because I will give you an answer for the discomfort next week. But this week, what I want you to do, all right? What I want you to walk away with, as soon as I'm done here, I want you to really think, why am I where I'm at? What am I supposed to do? What choice am I supposed to take? And think of the wisest possible choice that you could make to guarantee an awesome outcome for God and His kingdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Rabbi Rodrigo. Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you so much for that message. There was a lot of information to retain. I'll have to watch it again on YouTube to make sure I get it. But I did walk away with how can we be wise in the scenarios that we find ourselves in. And one of the scriptures that you read, I'm just going to paraphrase it. It just reminds me that like sometimes wisdom